Well, welcome everybody. If you're listening to this podcast at the time that it goes live, I just want you to know all my free webinars are available at the moment. So if you want to learn from Temple Grandin, Dean Beadle, myself, I've got a fantastic new course comparison guide because I know I offer a lot of courses. If you're looking at what training you want to do this year, I would have a look at that if you're going to do the new PDA course, New Teacher Assistant Part 3. I've got so many courses and I know it can be overwhelming. So one of the things I do once a term is offer them like parts of those courses or an introduction or webinar for free to give you an idea what you'll learn. So I thought, well, for the podcast listeners, you mightn't want to watch our webinar. Why don't I share the Tony Attwood first lesson that explains the diagnosis, how girls differ. The way I see it, Tony's a psychologist, I'm a teacher. So Tony does what is autism spectrum, I do what to do. And I think our two courses are really your foundation courses. If you want to learn anything about the spectrum, I think you learn from Tony first and then me, or vice versa. We both complement each other because he brings the psychologist perspective, I bring the what to do in your classroom perspective. So this is the first lesson of his online course, which for many of you who have heard Tony speak will be a great refresher. But I would love you, if you haven't already done this, to actually make sure you sign up on my podcast page to get the handout and the ebook that go with this, because that'll really help you as a refresher. Or if Tony's new to you, you might consider doing his course, which is on special at the moment. So make sure you go to the page that has this podcast, or if you get my emails, make sure you check them out or check on Facebook. I'm sure I'm putting up lots of posts about it. So enjoy, but I would recommend that you print the handout and get the ebook to go along with this podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Sue Larkey podcast. As I always say, you have to embrace difference to make a difference. Let's dive into today's podcast.
Hello, I'm Tony Attwood and welcome to Education Events online course on autism spectrum disorders. I've specialised in this area for over 40 years, probably before some of you were born, and met many thousands of people with an autism spectrum disorder. They have been my guides to discover the world of autism. In a way, autism is a different way of perceiving, thinking, learning, and relating. It's different, not necessarily defective. And my definition of autism spectrum disorder is actually someone who in life has found something more interesting than socializing, but they happen to be with social zealots that prioritize socializing. Now, when I began in the mid to early 1970s, the conceptualization of autism spectrum disorders was that it was an expression of schizophrenia. The person is withdrawn, not socializing, but we now recognize that it is not schizophrenia. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder. That is, the brain is wired differently, not necessarily defectively. So for the child with an autism spectrum disorder, we recognize that they are going to have to learn some skills, and it is not caused by bad parenting. Now, some parents may have a whew, because that may be the complaint of neighbors and people you don't know very well, because the child looks like any other kid. We have the phrase madness is hereditary. You get it from your children. And if you have an ASD child in the family, as I do, you'll find that it really does change the dynamics in a variety of ways. So what we're going to explore is what is autism spectrum disorder. When I began 40 years ago, all we knew of was the silent, aloof, classically autistic child, often unfortunately put in an institution, not given the support that is given today. So for many of the children of this generation, their prognosis or future is much better than those kids I knew 40 years ago. So let's have a look at the diagnostic criteria. We use a document called DSM-5, Diagnostical and Statistical Manual, published by the American Psychiatric Association. I actually don't see it as a psychiatric illness. I see it as a shall we say, a difference, not a defect, and I'm cautious of seeing it as a psychiatric condition. However, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual, no statistics in it, but never mind, gives a clear description of what is autism spectrum disorder. However, as a great fan of Harry Potter, I would like a sorting hat. And you just put the hat on the child and it goes ding and says ASD, ODD or whatever. But what I'm finding is that the kids that I see today have more than one diagnosis, like kids used to collect stamps. And so this person is ASD, ODD, OCD, ADHD, and all sorts of components. Now, they may be true, still the same child, but there may be multiple diagnoses. What we're going to focus on today is autism spectrum disorder. Now, to explore the first diagnostic criterion, A, persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across contexts, manifested by all three of the following. Now, the important part is all three. Now, the first one is deficits in social emotional reciprocity. Reciprocity means the balance of interaction. My interpretation of reciprocity is illustrated by two expressions of autism spectrum disorder. One is the child who is sitting in a corner playing with his Lego. Rest of the kids are playing over there. As far as this kid is concerned, I don't get it. I don't understand it. If I share, I lose control. I want to do it my way. What I'm doing is far more interesting than what they're doing, and it is being alone, not lonely. So the person is isolated, introverted, withdrawn, and physically conspicuous in their isolation. But there's a second group who are actually extroverted, intrusive, and intense. What they will do is go over to the rest of the kids and they're a bossy boots. They walk in, take control, you do this, stand too close, are the rule policeman enforcing what's supposed to occur, not reading the signals, etc. Now, this is a group of kids who are intrusive and intense, but not reading the signals. I describe them as Italian drivers. And having been to Rome, Athens and Paris, I would say the Italian drivers are the worst. They go through red traffic lights, they park wherever they want to. I've actually had motorbikes riding on the pavement. Right, in my origins, you just don't do that. But the way I describe it is, if you were an audience and I was presenting to you, I would try and stand as close as possible, not too close. I do know the limits. And I would watch your faces, because for me, faces are traffic lights. So if somebody smiles, nods, green light, I keep talking. If somebody goes, amber light, slow down, not accelerate. And if somebody bursts into tears, red light, I'd stop. But they often don't see the no tailgating signs and invade your personal body space, don't see the speed limit and talk too fast. So they are trying to engage, not reading the signals, especially facial expressions that tells how someone is thinking and feeling about what you're saying and doing. But this child becomes very upset when it doesn't work, because they want to make friends, they want to be part of the group, they want to be respected and valued, but when it isn't, they are heartbroken and can't understand why it goes wrong. So that's the balance that's occurring. So two forms of reciprocity. Now the second is deficits in non-verbal communication behaviors used in social interaction. Now this is the ability to read a face, body language, gestures, tone of voice, etc., all the social cues. It's to read the social world. Now this child may be able to read a book, no problem. But reading facial expressions and people is a real challenge. And one of the difficulties is, if a child can't read a book, well, we know it fairly quickly and we have lots of programs to help. But if they can't read a face and body language, where do we go for help? If it's a language problem, we have a speech pathologist, movement and sensory and OT. But who's the social therapist that is able to design programs and help that person understand the social world? So this means that sometimes there are major difficulties. Now, I am going to become Asperger's syndrome. Oh, actually, I'll do a bit of explaining. I'm going to use the term Asperger's syndrome rather than the new DSM-5 is going to replace Asperger's syndrome with autism spectrum disorder level 1 without language and intellectual impairment. That is very clumsy. So for simplicity and continuity, I'm going to use the term Asperger's syndrome, and there is no law to stop you using the term Asperger's syndrome. Nobody's going to come along and give you a $50 fine for saying he's got Asperger's syndrome. If you want to use it, you use it. It's what everyone else understands. So, right. Now, so with the child with Asperger's syndrome, they have major difficulties with reading body language, all the sorts of things that other children seem to know intuitively and instinctively. They are going to have to learn. Now, what's it like to have Asperger's syndrome? Well, I'm going to experience it now. I want you to imagine that you're an audience and I'm reading your faces. I need glasses to see what your facial expressions are. So if I took my glasses off, I have acquired Asperger's syndrome, because I can see where you are, but I can't read your facial expressions. And that's what it's like for a person with ASD. And it's hard to understand that someone who can tell you the name of every dinosaur in the Jurassic period can't read facial expressions, can't tell when you're annoyed or embarrassed or upset about something. What we can't do is put a pair of glasses on that suddenly the social world is in focus, is in clear, and I understand it. So that explains the problems that can occur. Now, the third one is deficits in developing, understanding, and maintaining relationships. For severe autism, this in a way is being aloof and very distant. But today I'm really talking about what's called ASD level 1 without Asperger's syndrome. And for this group, it is a problem in making friends. I have a granddaughter, Alice, and when she was just over 2 years old, I watched with amazement as we were at a cafe, and there were two little girls just a couple of years older than her, and she looked at them as they were playing, and I'm not sure how she did it, but she just sort of moved in, watched, checked, moved in, watched, bit of imitation, and within 30 seconds they're all playing together. And it was done so effortlessly and seamlessly and so amazingly successful that the kids with ASD look at that and say, I don't get it. I don't know how to do that. And despite their intelligence, they're going to have to learn what to do. But this also goes through not only in terms of making friends, it's also keeping friends. And if you've got teenagers, how often to text somebody, how often to see them. And sometimes when they have a friend, they may not know the intensity of friendship and follow that person like a shadow, or hardly ever contact them. So they're going to need advice in a variety of ways in terms of friendships and relationships. And in the diagnostic assessment, that is the area we explore. Now, Section B, Criterion B. Restricted repetitive patterns of behaviour, interests or activities as manifested by at least 2 out of 4 of the following. The first is stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech. This is the signature mannerisms of autism. This is the flapping, the grimacing, the toe walking, the little mannerisms that may occur. Now that's really associated with classic autism, the severest expression of autism. And those with Asperger's syndrome may rarely actually do that. So it would be unusual to have the flaps and so on. And some may rock when they're anxious, but not that conspicuous. But it's the next 3. One is insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines or ritualized patterns of behavior. Variety is not the spice of life. The person wants continuity and predictability, and if it's not as anticipated, they hit the panic button. They wake up in the morning with a clear plan, this is what we're going to do. And when there's a change, they have no idea how to reconfigure the plan for the day. They can't visualize it. They don't know what to do. They hit the panic button. Now, for me, insisting on sameness and routines and ritualized patterns is actually a sign of anxiety. And I think this is a behavioral mechanism of imposing routines and needing rituals that are soothing and calming, are seen as a signs of autism spectrum disorder, but I actually see as a sign of anxiety. Now, the next one is highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. And yes, lots of boys like Thomas the Tank Engine, but this kid is a walking encyclopedia of everything you needed to know about the Reverend Audrey, Thomas, Percy and the lot. He is so fascinated by it, and he can spot a Thomas engine at 100 meters in a bush and can tell you all about the information from it. So in that sense, it's what other kids are interested, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, etc., but take it to a degree that it really is a dominant part of that person's life. Or it's very unusual, and in some ways it may be, say, a fascination with lawnmowers and taking them apart and so on. But it's a girl that takes apart the lawnmower and talks about lawnmowers. Or it's a girl that's got 80 Barbie dolls. Lots of girls have Barbie dolls, but there's a lot more here. So it may be something that is unusual in intensity and number, but also in terms of focus, like drain covers. And through the decades, I have been educated by people with ASD in all sorts of fascinating areas, from dinosaurs and Thomas the Tank Engine, plus the Titanic, which I'm an expert on now, to all sorts of obscure things. Now, don't forget, sometimes this is their career, where people come to them for their expertise in certain areas. So there's something that is fascinating for that individual, and it is something that is not necessarily cool and trendy. It's what they like. Starts off with collecting objects, seashells, but she's got 1,000 of them, right the way through to information on a topic and eventually a theme or something that may be a career. Now, the next one, hyper and hyporeactivity to sensory input. The new criteria now includes this. And this is excellent because it now gives credibility to the sensory environment. That certain sounds are excruciatingly painful. There are aspects of aroma or light intensity, all those sorts of things, of seams in clothing or labels that are painful for the child, not uncomfortable, actually painful, and there is a pain reaction. So sometimes the social withdrawal is not exclusively because of social confusion, but because of sensory experiences. Not liking birthday parties because there are balloons that could go pop. So it's those sorts of things that lead to major problems. But the child with ASD is thinking, you see that balloon, you hear that dog barking, you hear the vacuum cleaner, but somehow it doesn't upset you. And I've no idea how you do it. And I wish I could be like you in that setting. So you can see on those components that there are many social, sensory, and behavioral differences that occur. But please remember that there is nothing unique in ASD. And I've never met anyone who doesn't have a little bit of it. And I've never met anyone with ASD who has every one of the signs. It's just how many of you got and how does it affect your life. But there's new work coming into this area. And if you tune in to my subsequent presentation, I'm going to take this in much more detail: friendship, sensory sensitivity, managing anxiety, and special interests, which I find fascinating. So this is a trailer in a way for subsequent presentation. But something is starting to develop which I'm very excited about. And that is the realization that there are more girls with Asperger's syndrome than we first thought. And it's what we call the invisible end of the spectrum. Ruth Baker is a GP, and she's explored the area of autism spectrum disorders, and she calls it invisible. They're there, but they don't want you to notice they're there. And I think girls with Asperger's syndrome are actually more intelligent and creative than the boys in how they cope with being different. So what happens is, as I described, there is the introverted, isolated, extroverted, intrusive, intense, but actually there's a third group, and it can be the girls, sometimes the boys. And what they will do very intelligently is go, okay, I don't get it, I don't understand, but I'm going to watch and avidly watch. And I'm going to try and find patterns and sequences and consequences to try and understand the rules of socializing. So that girl will step back, will become an observer rather than participant. And what she's doing is developing coping and camouflaging mechanisms of observation, analysis, imitation, and then growing up to become an actress or a psychologist. So, and I am not joking on that in a way. So when we look at this, it's what the child may do is observe and try to understand before they make a first step. There is almost a performance anxiety in social situations of not wanting to make a mistake, and certainly not to be noticed for not being good at it. And if you don't try, you don't make a mistake. But what they're doing is trying to understand social interactions. But there is another way that that girl may understand the social world by reading fiction. Often the boys, it's facts, Guinness Book of Records, wanting to know about all the dinosaurs and their teeth and things like that. But here she reads Harry Potter. And in Harry Potter, in the text, is what Hermione is thinking and feeling. And Hermione is the quintessential Aspie girl. At Hogwarts, she has no female friends. She is much more comfortable with the boys because they're logical, get them like mathematics, and I can trust them better than the girls who are mean, bitchy, and horrible in unbelievable ways. And she doesn't do bitchiness. So what she's doing is reading fiction because within the text is the thoughts and feelings of other people. If you can't read body language, but you can read a book, there in the text is insight into the thoughts and feelings of other people. But she may be a teenager, and she's not part of a group. She's poor in the currency of friendship. Nobody really wants to be with her because she's not cool and trendy in what she wears and what she's interested in, what she wants to talk about. But she wants to learn. And if she sort of moses in and tries to see what's going on, they'll go, who are you looking at? And in a not nice way, tell her to go away. I can't say what I would say because it's being recorded. But it means that she needs to learn it. So she may use television and films to work out what's going on. So she may avidly watch soap operas like in Australia, Home and Away and Neighbours, because with that you can see and absorb the interactions of others, but you've also got the pause and replay button. So what that person can do is say, okay, they don't include me, but I need to find out. I will watch soap operas as my script and documentary of social interaction to learn about thoughts and feelings, but also to give me a script of what to do. But unfortunately, this over-dramatizes what can be done. But it means that the girl may also decode social situations in doll play. So instead of Barbie and Ken getting married or Barbie doing retail therapy, Barbie is the teacher, this Barbie is the child in question, all the other Barbies are the kids. She is an avid observer and visual recorder of the events of the day. Her mind is like a YouTube video camera, and she then replays the events of the day to try and analyze what was going on. So this is Barbie to recreate events of the day or rehearse what to say or do tomorrow. It's solitary play, but it's her decoding, unpacking social interaction. But another component is imaginary friends. And if you're not included and you're not valued and life is tough and you're not welcome, well, you create your own world. Sometimes it's the world of dinosaurs, no school, no people, or it's another planet or anywhere else but here, ancient history, for example. And so what the person is doing is saying, I don't fit in, so I will escape into imagination. I'll become an avid reader of fiction. And in fiction, I will explore alternative worlds that are safe, or I will write fiction that I can control and express my inner thoughts and feelings. But what she may also do is start to create imaginary friends. Now, some typical kids will do that temporarily, but they are aware that if they are playing with their imaginary friends, that other people, if they were listening in or watching, might think you're weird. But unfortunately, the girl with Asperger's may not understand and perceive the thoughts and feelings of others. And so she talks aloud to her imaginary friends in class with all the kids watching and becomes so entranced and engaged by it, the rest of the world disappears. That's what she wants, without realizing people think she's developing schizophrenia or psychosis. It's not, it's loneliness. And it's better to have imaginary friends than no friends. It's not psychotic. It's a sign of very good imagination. But other components for the girls is that compared to the boys who make a mistake, they explode and it's chaos and there's a problem and he's got to be referred. He's either diagnosed or medicated or he sees a psychologist. We can't keep going with him. But what the girl may do is if she makes a mistake socially clumsy and maybe annoying people or breaking the codes, is she apologizes. But she apologizes so profusely and so effectively. Oh, I'm sorry I did that. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. That we forgive and forget, but don't realize there's a pattern developing. She didn't know. And there are many circumstances when she should know. But by learning the art of apology, she's got by. We spend ages teaching the art of apology to boys with Asperger's. They often just don't get it. In other words, it's not my fault, it's your fault, or why should I apologize, etc. Girls will do it profusely, but also appease. They don't want to let you down. So when mum says, we got a birthday party on Saturday with your cousins, will you be okay? Yes. Now, you haven't seen your cousins for 5 years. They're strangers to you. You sure you'll be okay? Yes. And I got to take your brother to football. He'll be gone for a couple of hours. You'll be on your own. Are you sure you'll be okay? Yes. But look at the terror in her eyes. Girls are often more determined and brave than the boys in giving it a go. But what they often do is suppress it at school and release it when they get home. And they are Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They are a goody two-shoes at school and they are focused on the work and they will imitate the teacher and they are such perfect behavior, but they've suppressed it, the confusion, I don't know what to do. And the moment they walk into the car, the moment they get home through the front door, and you have got somebody who releases all their agitation. It's not bad parenting, it's suppression at school. But also she becomes a chameleon. She's learnt the script, the role, this is what I do. And in doing that, she's succeeded, but it's superficial sociability based on what she's seen, but not a true social identity and social character. So she becomes the person necessary for the situation. She wears a mask. Quote from the parent, Emily masks in public and will melt down the second she's out of the situation. She's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And what she's doing is creating a mask. And this is my persona, and I will not allow people to see behind the mask. One of the things I found with Asperger's through the years is that the person may learn how to socialize and may socialize actually very successfully for a short time. And it's like Cinderella at the ball at midnight. They can socialize, be the life and soul of the party, but after 2 hours, that's it. I go home tomorrow, under the covers, in the cupboard, that's it. I'm not going to see anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody. It's just Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, or whatever it is. I will just shut down. But for that 2 hours, I made it. So that girl has a persona and is socializing intellectually, and it's exhausting. But she has a mask. Also, for some of the girls, they can be less disruptive and so less likely to be noticed. They don't want to be the center of attention. And quote, we think that if we are very, very good, people will like us and all will be well. So it becomes a goody two-shoes. We find at high school they're either a puritanical nun or they go, right, I walk the walk, I talk the talk, I did everything that I'm supposed to do, but I still didn't get accepted. Right, so, sorry, you lot, I'm going off the rails, Promiscuity, yeah, but at least I'll be popular. Drugs, at least I'll be happy. And so she's either a goody two-shoes, puritanical and absolutely delightful from the teacher's perspective, or she said, right, it didn't work, so I'm going to explore the dark side. Now, the special interests of the girls are more unusual in terms of intensity than focus. It sometimes is what girls would not be interested in. It may be cars and motorbikes, for example. But it can also be the intensity. For example, lots of girls like horses. But it's July and she's moved her mattress into the stable. And she just lives with the horse. And of course, horses know that she thinks the world of them. And as far as she's concerned, horses and animals are better than people. And she really prefers to relate to animals and people. They're her best friends. But also, friends are imaginary friends. And imaginary friends are nice and kind. And they're the sort of person that she's always wanted them to be. Don't knock it. It's her way of coping. But it's a sign that she's going to need support and guidance in how to be included and accepted by the peer group. So in that imitation, there's observing and absorbing the speech, mannerisms, character, even persona of someone who is successful, becoming an expert mimic, doing the voices of people, using speech and drama lessons and becoming an actor or actress and winning an Oscar. Yes. So that person has a role, a script, and for some teenagers that I see, they say, when we say life's a stage, they say, yeah, it is like a stage. But the teenagers say, yeah, we're on stage, having Asperger's. All the other teenagers have got the script. They know their lines, they know my lines, they know the storyline, they know what's going to happen next. They're relaxed. Me, I don't have the script. I don't know what's next. I say what I think is next, and they look at me and laugh as though I'm stupid. So I'm in a play, but I don't know my lines. And one of the most intolerant groups in your lifespan is teenagers who pride themselves on difference, but in fact they're incredibly conservative in who they will tolerate within their own age group. And those with ASD are easy victims of bullying and teasing. And often in ASD, I'm not worried about ASD, I'm worried about what neurotypicals will do to that person in bullying and teasing. So, for teenagers, we use speech and drama lessons, learning how to act, but not to destroy the real self, and to have confidence. It's what I call be a first-rate Aspie, not a second-rate neurotypical. So, in imitation, it's learning how to act in real situations. Quote, I'm an exceptional mimic, and I've used this to survive. I was previously diagnosed with multiple personality disorder. So you can get all sorts of confusion with this. Quote, I try to be I shall rephrase that. I try to be who they want me to be, but then there's a lack of self. And one of the hardest things to ask a teenager or adult with Asperger's is, who are you? And they reply, I know who I'm supposed to be, but I don't know the real me, and I don't want to reveal the real me because they may not like the real me. And so that can be one of the most harrowing parts of ASD. In that imitation, there's an excellent book by Leanne Holiday-Willey, personal friend of mine. She's lovely and she has some wonderful words of wisdom. And she wrote the first autobiography, Pretending to be Normal. And that's what the person is doing. Quote, I have done such a great job of pretending to be normal that nobody really believes I have Asperger's. And that means the teacher may disagree with or reject the diagnosis because there are times she is socially skilled, but by intellectual effort. But there are also aspects of imitation and good behavior and being unlike the boys with Asperger's syndrome. So the teacher may have a fairly accurate schema of boys with Asperger's, but not the girls. And the girls are there, and they are often suffering in silence. And it's very important to recognize them. Now, there are some good books in this. Aspergirls by Rudy Simone is excellent, and she gives some very wise advice. So I would recommend that, especially for parents and young adults with Asperger's syndrome. And also a friend of mine, Danuta Bulak-Patterson, worked with me at the Minds and Hearts Clinic in Brisbane. She specialises in girls and women with Asperger's syndrome in Melbourne, and she's written I'm an Aspie Girl, which is beautifully illustrated by her mother and is a wonderful introduction to the girl of her characteristics. So I strongly recommend that book. So that is the end of my introduction of what is ASD. Hopefully you'll now be interested in the second part, which is much more detail and what to do. Okay, thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that and really enjoyed hearing Tony's insights. I was looking at the evaluations from his course today because I've just been updating the handout and the ebook that you'll get to go with the course or this lesson. I love this from some of the people who've done the course. I already had an extensive knowledge, but Tony provided further clarification and information. I love this one. It has helped me understand my daughter more and given me lots of helpful advice on strategies to use in my school with my students, as I'm a special education teacher aide. I adore this one too, understanding those with ASD so much better, how to help them and what struggles they go through, and why we need to put in supports to help in their lives. I love that. I love this one too. It explains some of the behaviours and responses I see in students. And this is what, for me, the first time I saw Tony Attwood, I remember driving from Melbourne up to Ballarat. And he used to do this course called Why Does He Do That? Which is was so male back then, 30 years ago, or not 30, maybe 20 years ago. I'm trying to think. I was pregnant with Eliza. So maybe 24 years ago. I can't believe that. Anyway, I remember driving home, just my brain ready to explode. This was before Tony had any books, and I highly recommend, if you're more of a reader, look at getting Tony's books. They're on my website. They're on with the blog. So if this is all new to you, I would get his purple one, or some people would call it blue, depending how you see colours, which is a guide for parents and professionals. But the complete guide I refer to all the time. That's the one with the shell on the front. But don't try and read that front to back. The way to use the complete guide is to pick it up, look in the reference at the back. So if you want to know more about bullying, or you want to know more about special interests, or you want to know more, it's like an encyclopedia. And he updates it regularly. It's fantastic. In fact, I think every school should have both of those books. They're invaluable. In fact, one of the things that inspired me to do this as a podcast for you is I met a teacher last week at a school I was doing a training in, and he said how much he loved Tony's course and it really complemented what he'd learned from me last week. And he said, what's been great is now I've done the course, I've got Tony's books there and I access them so much more because I can sort of hear Tony's voice in my head. And I thought, that's me. I've heard Tony since that day in Ballarat. I would have heard Tony speak 50 times or more. Every time at a conference, Tony came all around Australia with me for many years. We used to do 8 to 10 events every year. I have heard Tony speak at every time I learn something. So anyway, so back to that understanding your students. So for me, that is why when I drove home from Ballarat that day, I was working in an autism school and so many things Tony said made sense. It just changed. I thought I understood some of my students, but Tony just changed my thinking. And now we understand girls, so it's a whole nother level. I love this feedback. It has given me lots of useful information. I have a better understanding now as to why ASD children and adults behave in particular ways. And I think that's really important, understanding that why. And that's what Tony, that why does he do that? His original speech makes so much sense. He's really about the why and I'm about the what to do. I'm going to leave you on this one. I love this course. Other than it's an absolutely brilliant course, I love Tony's real examples along with his sense of humour. So I'm going to now get Tony to explain what you'll learn in the course. I hope you can join Tony for the online course. It's 5 hours. But as you just saw, that podcast went really fast. And don't forget to sign up to get the handout that went with this podcast and the ebook. And if you prefer to watch it, you can actually rewatch Tony talking about it and all the slides come up. Can you do me a favour? If this podcast helped you understand, can you share this with someone else? I don't often remind you to share a podcast, but I think for many people, Tony's going to give them insights and understanding. I know this course is extremely popular with parents, and I can understand why, because Tony really gives them an understanding to what they already know about their child, but understands why their child does something. So Be that person. Share this podcast with someone you think might find this helpful, insightful, but also support them by sharing.
Hello, Tony Atwood here, and explaining the new program developed by Soolaki. And it's an online course of 5 sessions, really to learn what I have learned about autism spectrum disorders. And there are 5 parts to this course. Lesson 1 starts with what is autism spectrum disorder. For me, it's a different way of perceiving, thinking, learning, and relating. But it's obviously more complicated than that. But I will also go through the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. Exactly what do we look for to identify someone with ASD? But there's an intriguing new area, and that is girls with Asperger's syndrome, because girls have the same characteristics, but they're often smarter in how they cope with their social confusion. They observe, analyze, and imitate, and often aren't picked up until their teenage years. So I'll go through a little bit on how to spot the girls with Asperger's. That's lesson 1. Lesson 2 is on cognitive abilities, a different way of perceiving and learning. And those with ASD have to learn to read a face, socialize, etc. And if you're not good socially and you're not good at sports, the only thing you have at school is your intelligence. So academic success is very important for self-esteem. So I'll go through the cognitive abilities, in particular, a different way of learning, issues of visualization, often a picture is worth 1,000 words, and learning by demonstration, and difficulties with processing time. Right answer took a while to get there. Also, I will go through some of the challenges for those who have difficulties learning to read, and also those who have challenges or talents in mathematics. So that's lesson 2. Lesson 3 continues the cognitive abilities, looking at the characteristic of a one-track mind, the fear of making a mistake, what we call weak central coherence, but you'll have to watch the program to pick up what that actually is, and also what are the qualities needed in a teacher to get the best out of someone with ASD. Also, I'm going to focus in that lesson on sensory sensitivity, how it affects that person, especially in the classroom, and sometimes the playground. It's the noise of the children shouting at each other, which is more aversive than the social component. I'll also go through, in that lesson, challenging behavior in terms of communication difficulties, and perhaps more for those who have autistic than Asperger features. Lesson 4, anxiety. There's one thing that those with ASD are really good at: worrying. And anxiety pervades your whole day and affects many aspects of your life. So anxiety is going to be a feature in terms of how is it expressed and how does that person manage their anxiety in a constructive way. I'll also go through how the person with ASD needs to learn how to identify emotions in others, facial reading, body language, but also expressing emotions themselves. So it's going through affective or emotion education. It's a part of life that they need to know. But then when you have such strong emotions, how do you manage them? So I've developed the concept of the emotional toolbox to fix the feeling. So we go through physical, sensory, social relaxation tools that can be used both at home and at school. Now, lesson 5 is on friendship. You really don't have to teach typical kids how to make friends. They know intuitively, but that's what you've got to teach the kid with ASD. I'm going to go through the special interests from Thomas the Tank Engine to quantum physics, and also the talents and qualities of the person with ASD that needs to be recognized and enhanced to improve self-esteem and possibly employment. So those are the 5 lessons.
I hope you've got some great tips and strategies to make a difference. Remember, strategies wear out and not every strategy works for everybody. If you're ready to dive in deeper to more strategies and ideas to make a difference, I'd highly recommend you consider Dr. Tony Atwood or my online courses. For more information, visit my website www.suelarkey.com.au.